Hey, everybody. I'm so excited that you've decided to join me on tonight for this wonderful, wonderful occasion. I'm so glad. Listen, it's a Thursday night, and I'm glad that you just made your way and made yourself available for this amazing and tremendous conversation I'm going to have tonight about the concept of how to plant a virtual church. Man, I've got two major theologians with me tonight, Bishop Dennis Myles Golphin and Bishop Andy C. Lewter, Archbishop D. Myles Golphin and Bishop Andy C. Lewter. These two theologians are just going to blow your mind as they talk about the concept of planting a virtual church. Now, they've done a webinar about this, but I wanted to know a little bit about the content from the webinar. So they allowed me to sit down with them and have a live interview. So you're going to watch the live interview, and then guess what? I'm gonna have them here with us tonight doing a live Q&A session. So listen, do this for me. Share this with as many people as you possibly can, because you get to hear it live tonight from Archbishop D. Myles Golphin and Bishop Andy C. Lewter as soon as the interview is over. I mean, as soon as the interview is over. We're coming on live to answer some of your questions. So get your questions together. Put your questions down in the comments. We're going to answer your questions live tonight right here on this platform. Listen, we're getting ready to start the interview so you can see it. But listen, I want you to make sure that you are sharing this with as many people as possible, because this is going to bless your soul tonight. If you know somebody who's interested in planting a virtual church, if you know somebody who's interested in starting a church, if you know somebody who's interested in church at all, you want to hear this conversation about how a technology and church converges to do something more with the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's going to be amazing. You ready? Are you ready? I'm trying to give you a couple of seconds to invite a couple of more people. Are you ready for real? Here we go. Watch this interview, and we're going to be right back with Archbishop D. Myles Golphin and Bishop Andy C. Lewter right here, right now. We'll see you in a second. Hey, everybody. This is Pastor RJ Stevenson. Listen, I have the esteemed pleasure of bringing you some content today that is going to knock your socks off. I promise you, you want to go ahead and take this moment and opportunity to share this with as many pastors, church leaders, people who sick of modern or ordinary church. Send it to your grandma, send it to your grandkids, send it to everybody, because this conversation that we're getting ready to have today, man, it's just going to bless your whole life. Consider this. During the pandemic, COVID-19 to be specific, we saw the church shift. You heard me say plenty of times that the church has left the building. All of the buildings that we had, some of us were able to shift and pivot and use our houses of worship in ways to develop community, in ways to be a resource to others, even though we were not permitted or not really able, based on CDC guidelines, to gather safely together. We use our churches as urgent care centers, providing some of us boosters and vaccinations for people. We use our churches as places for food to resource our community when Walmart shut down chicken operations, okay? But what we're learning now is, as we return back to what we want to consider normalcy, that everything ain't normal. Nothing will ever be the same. We'll find out that as people come back to engage in our houses of worship, they're probably going to expect a little bit something different. So today, I've assembled two individuals. I mean, noted theologians. Did you hear what I said? Noted theologians that are going to talk to us through the concept of planting virtual churches. This is not your grandmama's church. This is how we will use the gospel to push us into the next generation. Let me introduce them to you today. This is Bishop Dennis Myles Golphin, Dr. Dennis M. Golphin, and Dr. Andy C. Lewter. Thank you all so much for joining me today for this amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this exchange. Happy to be here. Always delighted to be in the presence of my colleague, Dr. Golphin, and I've been a great fan and admirer of the work that you have been doing, Pastor, as well.
Thank you, Bishop Lewter. It's always a great pleasure to be with my colleague. We've done many coursework together, and we're happy to be here with Pastor Stevenson to talk about this great topic.
Now, listen, let me tell you who they are. Okay. This is Dr. Dennis Myles Golphin, noted theologian, and he is the curator and president of the Global Congress of Bishops. Listen, if you have been missing his Back to Basics courses, if you have been missing his courses about the end time, you don't want to miss his upcoming courses about the 3Ds, which I am absolutely excited about, and his course about the Revelation. Listen, this is somebody that you want to know. This as well is Dr. Andy C. Lewter. He is the historian of the Full Gospel Baptist Church. Yeah, that Full Gospel Baptist Church. This is Bishop and Dr. Andy C. Lewter. And let me tell you, what he brings to the table in terms of wealth of knowledge, innovation in church, and what he does in terms of inspiring other people to move to the next level is just going to get you where you need to be. So I'm just excited to be able to push the conversation. You all both did a session not too long ago about planting virtual churches. And to me, seeing it as a young church planter, I've been non-denominational. I've just recently transitioned out of a denomination. I try my best to be as innovative as possible to put Jesus in as many places as I possibly can. But watching and reviewing the session that you've done on virtual church planting took my thoughts to a whole nother level about, one, what is the purpose of the church in today's society? Two, how it is that I, as a planter or as a person who's seeking to save the lost, can go out and apply the gospel in places that are relevant. And three, what does it take to do it for real? We used to have storefront churches. I don't want us to turn into the same situation and have bootleg virtual churches. So I wanted to have this conversation with you all to give you all the opportunity and expose other people to the possibilities of virtual church. You all take the conversation away. I'm a student today. I might raise my hand every now and then, but I want everybody to understand the content that you're sharing.
Bishop Lewter, I'm going to let you start because we always start with the technical part of it, and I'll deal with the legal part of it.
Okay. Well, perhaps even as a preface to the technical and then later on the legal discussion, let me, if I can, Pastor and Dr. Golphin, insert and initiate this conversation and exchange with a historical context, because I do believe that what is taking place, what is happening, is not an invention on the part of ourselves. This is not the first time that the church has found itself in crisis. It's not the first time that the church has had to be imaginative and creative in terms of doing ministry. If I go all the way back to the beginning, to the first church, I see a very, very similar pattern. And what I like to think, Pastor Stevenson and Dr. Golphin, is that what we're doing, what we are engaged in, the exercises that we're currently involved in, is a repeat of history. It's not an invention. It's not a new paradigm, so to speak, but it is the church turning to the practices of the past and doing what we do best. And one of the things that the church does best is adjust and take situations that perhaps were not originally in place and then adapt new approaches and attitudes to make real and relevant the practice of ministry. Let me see if I can be a little more specific, and I hope I'm not delving too deep into the weeds here. But Christianity began as a member of the Jewish sectarian movement. Christianity operated and functioned alongside the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Qumranites, to a lesser degree, the Zealots, not to be confused with the Zealot Party, who in 66 AD would launch this revolt against Rome. But for the first 30 to 40 years, Christianity was literally a part of the Jewish sectarian movement. What then takes place is in 66 AD to 69 AD, there is this rebellion on the part of the Jews. They literally, physically drive the Romans out of the city. Vespasian, who is the general, becomes the emperor after an uprising and a Roman civil war where Galba, Otha, and Vitellius come in quick succession as emperors in the aftermath. I know I'm going somewhere. In the aftermath of Nero and Vespasian comes to power, he dispatches his son Titus to return to Jerusalem, which they had lost as a colony and as a remnant member of the Roman Empire, and Titus brings Jerusalem down. It is the Jewish revolt of 70 AD. Now, I've gone through that treatise and I've gone through that snippet of history, because as a result of that, Judaism itself, watch where I'm going, Judaism itself moves. There is the destruction of the temple. So the temple is no longer in place. It is no longer the central object of worship. The priesthood has been vacated, and Judaism moves from temple Judaism to rabbinic Judaism. It is the rise of the synagogal movement within Judaism. Well, that impacts the church, and this is where I want to park. That impacts the church, and that forced the church to recreate itself, to redefine itself. It began as a small group ministry, and then it had to adjust and evolve from there. So let me kind of update. Now, when we take a look at the church's ability to do that in the first century, to adapt, to adjust, to move from small group ministry to a more synagogal style of ministry and approach, that is exactly what has happened. Prior to the pandemic, the church literally was already in trouble. I know we don't like to talk about this a great deal, but we were seeing diminished attendance, a decline in attendance, and the pandemic exacerbated that and accelerated, watch this, accelerated our need to do something different. And so here we are, 2,000 years later. The gospel message is as real now as it has always been, but we are now forced to face some realities in regards to how we do church. As a matter of fact, that's one of my slogans, changing the way we do church one pew at a time. The massive cost, the rising cost of doing a brick and mortar in-person situation continues to make church planting a challenge. And as a result of that, Dr. Golphin and I have crafted a bit of a strategy on what are the kind of tools that you need now to do ministry in this context and in this day and time. You don't necessarily need pews, pulpit, brick and mortar. You need a computer screen. You need a camera. You need digital tools. And then you need the expertise of a Dr. Dennis Golphin to make sure that what you're doing survives legally and exhibits best practices as it relates to corporate structure.
Do you hear the kind of stuff we're dealing with today? We're not just having a conversation about why you should have a church, what your logo should look like, what does your music sound like. He just dumped the whole century's worth of church history on us, talking about virtual church planning. Bishop Golphin, listen, take it easy on us, okay, sir? Don't just shovel us down. help. Let's talk about the legal aspects of it.
My colleague has really opened this door up to the changing order of church, and let me, I guess, take us up a little modern day, since he went back to ancient day with church. I want to say this point. I think that as a structure of the church, the message, which is the most important thing, the charisma, what we are presenting to people, must remain intact. We must keep the apostolic tradition together, the death, burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The message hasn't changed. What we're talking about is the presentation of that message. And in modern day time, let me take history up a little bit and just start around 1830s with the Second Great Awakening, and how at that point we had a dilemma like we have in this pandemic, but because church attendance in the 1830s had dropped down to 2%. People were not going to church. It was stiff. It was not exciting. And the attendance was down to 2%. And then all these Adventist movements started. And it changed the whole structure of what church was all about. And we went from that era, then we came to other eras of the church where we see church growing. Even in the 1960s and the 70s, there became an era of small group movements, and people were kind of denying the brick and mortar church and moving into homes and trying to small groups. In the 1970s, there's a big move of the small group church movement. So we've always had an embryo look at how we structure church and how we do church. And so we have no different now in terms of where we at with the virtual church. We're taking advantage of social media, which we didn't have years ago. It would cost you an arm and a leg to do kind of the advertisement that we can do right now on social media. And then to take advantage of the tools, as Bishop Lewter mentioned, as Dr. Lewter mentioned, we have now to do the camera and screen and being on social media with almost nothing to actually have your audience be the world and not just be a pew in the church has now redefined who we are. But we also want to mention that as you structure, there's still some legality of structuring. You still must have a corporate structure. IN, an EIN number, which is very important. It legalizes you as a business, and then incorporating because it protects you as an entity. So when you're incorporated and you have your EIN number, that puts you as a business entity. Now you can take and open up a bank account in the name of your ministry, and then you can operate on a virtual basis for giving purposes and for structure as you go along. So there's a whole lot of different things that are involved, and we're going to talk more about it as we go, Pastor Stevenson.
You are right in terms of there's a whole lot involved, because I'm taking notes. I hope y'all taking notes too. I'm taking notes because I got some questions. I got questions about Bishop Lewter said, Dr. Lewter said, what the church does best is adjust. Sometimes, because look at how long it took for the church to engage in social media. I mean, if not for the pandemic, some churches would still be doing absolutely nothing to engage younger generations. They would be doing as little as they can in terms of technology. But the pandemic forced them. Everybody had to have a webcam. Everybody had to have a social media account. So some of the churches that thought that social media was the devil turn around and realize that the only way they would survive was online giving. The only way they would survive was to learn how to use social media and evangelism. And the ones that didn't were finding them not returning to buildings. We're seeing church signs turn into for sale signs and foreclosures because they were not willing to innovate. Then he said that the pandemic church, I want to know, is the pandemic church, he said the pre-pandemic church was in trouble. I want to know what we got to do so the post-pandemic church does not repeat that same trend. Bishop Golphin said, he talked about a great awakening. My question is, was this period another great awakening? Was this God shaking up our Etch-a-Sketch to remind us, hey, I'm doing a new thing, says the Lord. Can you not see it? Then he talked about church corporate structure. Now, you know, one thing that church folk have always had a problem with is talking about business and church. But I want to know, is the virtual church the new business model for ministry? Is the virtual church going to become another situation where we're finding ways to monetize the gospel for profit and gain rather than doing real ministry? How do you do virtual ministry for a virtual church? Are we just having worship experiences, or are we actually empowering people to do things virtually? Can we please take the conversation forward, because I'm excited.
Well, I think, Pastor, you have touched on several items that's worthy of our attention and our continued conversation. Yes, the truth of the matter is that the church as a whole has been slow and hesitant to embrace new technology, to ascend to different platforms, to utilize different tools. One of the other things that I do, and perhaps this is a shameless plug, but I own a IPTV network. It's called Church Talk TV. I have about 30 to 35 pastors, ministers, bishops who produce programs on a regular basis. And I have a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week television station that's available on our dedicated website. We have a YouTube version of that. We also appear on Roku channel. Now, I've been doing this 5 years, and I cannot tell you how difficult it was 5 years ago in order to get churches to even consider being a part of our television network. Their biggest problem was acquiring the technology and the equipment that it would take to produce content that could then be available on our network. Well, I need to tell you that this pandemic, just as you have said, forced every church to turn to some sort of AV solution. So the excuse and the impediment and the obstacle that kept churches from participating in our network before, that has disappeared because everybody is doing Zoom. Everybody is doing webcam. Everybody is doing productions. Now, the levels of those productions are varied. We have everything from people using their camera in the vertical position all the way to using programs like vMix and high production quality broadcast type equipment and software. Another area that I have seen this adjustment, again, 4 years ago, started working with local funeral homes, and I offered them the opportunity to stream the funeral services for people who, for whatever the reason, could not come to the funeral home. I could not get churches to participate. They just were not interested. Their attitude was, people are not going to pay for that. Well, since the pandemic, not only have the families paid for it, but the funeral homes themselves have decided this is vital, this is necessary. I can only put 50 people in my chapel. So it has become a byproduct of the pandemic. So while on the downside, the pandemic has been devastating in certain areas, those who have been willing to adjust and willing to adapt, it has created, in my case, it has created some business opportunities that simply did not exist prior to that. Dr. Golphin.
I think, Bishop, what the other part of that, and I hear what you're saying about technology. Let me take us back to the early church again. The church was always designed to be global. And we have this idea that the church became localized only in Jerusalem until Acts 8, when persecution forced the apostles to move out. Now, that being said, I think we've had a problem in the pre-pandemic church of more churches becoming too localized and cultish in its localized community. Local churches have become secretive and only among their congregation. This social media, your TV station, Dr. Lewter, the social media network has forced all of us to become global. I'm meeting weekly with bishops and pastors all over the world on meeting platforms, communication platforms. Not just, I don't have to fly to different countries like I used to in years past. I now can have weekly meetings with bishops in various parts of the world, various countries. It is becoming global. Imagine now we've got people in India and Africa and in the islands watching your local worship service. Now, I think, and Pastor Stevenson, here's the problem of getting people to understand, although now they are doing a little more global ministry, they've got to fix themselves to speak to a global audience. You got people still now have a global audience acting like they're only talking to their local church. That's a problem. You have a global audience now, so start acting like you're talking to a global audience. We probably can talk about that for a while.
Bishop, now here's my question. And I called you Bishop for a reason in that context. I need you to switch from doctor to bishop right quick.
Okay.
Is everybody anointed for global ministry? And my question is, how can you be anointed for global ministry when you won't do local evangelism? How can you reach the masses when you won't even reach outside of your four walls in the city where you are? Do we need to rewire the way that we are preparing people for ministry? Or should we have people who are designated for local because they're introverts and they're not really trying to become global? They don't want to be on the screen, but still want to be used by God. Should we be trying to push everybody into global ministry when they're afraid to walk into a room without taking their mask off, when they're afraid to lay hands on people without having gloves on? You know, they ain't doing baptisms no more because they got to be 6 feet away. So, you know, I've been trying to figure out how people going to do baptism of a virtual church. We're going to spray the screen or something like how's it going to work? So, you know, how do we go back to even prepare people to have a new mindset or a new frame of reference to begin thinking through the vision of virtual church planting?
Bishop Lou, let me skip in here for a minute. I think one of the things that's happened, you're right. No, everybody's not anointed for global ministry, and you're right. Some people haven't even touched their local communities. I talked to some officials of a group called Angel Food, who were actually trying to do a job of putting trailers. They had all this food distribution they've been doing all over the country, and they would bring in trailers and park them at a church so they could distribute food all over. Last year, it was a lot of that. And I asked one of the officials at Angel Food, I said, why is it you guys got so much food and can distribute it and do things like this? He said to me, Bishop, we've always had this. We've been doing this for years. We didn't just start this during the pandemics. We just had churches that were not accepting it. They weren't doing local community ministry. And so it was hard to get them to get a trailer load of food and put it in the community. Now we had churches forced to do local ministry because what else are they going to do? So we got churches now who became community involved because there was nothing else to do but just serve the community. So you're right. We got some people going to be community active, and we got some people who are global active. And we got people, as you said, who are trying to be global who don't even touch their community.
But Bishop, they became community active as a response to crisis. They became community active because having praise breaks and shout fest on Sunday mornings, nobody's in the building. So that level of ministry was no longer relevant, and it forced them to find a way to have a use for who they say they were. And, you know, somebody said it well, if you're not selling fish, take down the sign. So, you know, ministries who are not adamant about evangelism and teaching evangelism as a context before the pandemic did not and could not grow during the pandemic, because now the people are at home. The people still didn't know the names of their next door neighbors. They still were not inviting people. If they weren't inviting you to come to the building, they sure weren't inviting you to watch online. So, I mean, it illuminated some definite deficiencies about the church at large, about what it is we're supposed to be doing in terms of commission and commandment. Now, my question is this. You know, I believe in the fog. I believe in the drama of the lights. I believe in having strong technology. I love LED walls. But if you can't break all that down and still engage people with relevant ministry, the technology is not going to help you. Bishop Lewter, how do we find a strong balance between technology in this virtual space so that we don't focus so much on the camera and what we look like on the inside of it and not do ministry to people?
It is an excellent question, Pastor, and I want to go back to your initial inquiry, and that is you are absolutely, and I totally agree with both you and Dr. Golphin. Everyone is not equipped and prepared, and even using your vocabulary, anointed to do global ministry. One of the things that I have found very, very challenging is helping churches recognize and understand that you're no longer competing with the church down the street or around the corner. You're competing with production levels, standards, and quality that is universal. Our people are bombarded with images and programming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no way you're going to leave an impression. There's no way you're going to make an impact, let alone leave an impression. With a half-hour program done by a single camera that does not move, that is one perspective, one dimensional. It is set up in a vertical format. It doesn't even use 16 by 9 orientation, and expect to have any kind of impact. And so one of the things that we have to do is understand that in some instances, less is more. That you cannot compete with the ABCs, CBS, and NBCs, the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the Fox News Network, with all of the features and the benefits that they have in terms of production. But you can do a simple message-based program and content that gets the ball across the plate. But it takes orientation, it takes making yourself available, and it takes listening to individuals who have the expertise in the area in order to make that happen. Here is the harsh reality, Pastor. The reality is there's always been a great gulf between broadcast quality productions and consumer. Let me remind people that the television, and I just want to be technical here for just a second, the television started with the ability to convey and communicate 280 lines of resolution. That's from top to bottom, 280 lines of resolution. Well, when the computers, the advent of computers started, watch where I'm going, started with 640 lines of resolution. So there was a great gap, a great gulf. People were watching television with 280 lines of resolution, and then they turned to a computer screen, those monochrome green or orange computer screens that had 640 lines of resolution. Well, over the years, there's been a convergence, not a convergence in the theological sense, but convergence in the technical sense. Number one, television began to leap in terms of the resolution that they were able to offer. We went from 280 lines of resolution to 525 lines of resolution to then 640 lines of resolution to 720 lines of resolution to 1280 lines of resolution to 1,980 lines of resolution, and now we have 4K. That's just on the TV side. And then the computer had similar kinds of patterns of growth. Well, over the time, those two technologies and platforms converge, because the same resolution that you could get on television now was available with a computer-based product, and that convergence made the ability to do what we're doing right now possible. I go back to a time when a camera that resembled the imagery and the resolution that we're looking at now, you had to get an Ikigama camera or a Hitachi camera, and it cost $30,000 just for one camera. Well, the camera on your phone gives you better resolution than the Ikigama and the Hitachi of the late 1970s and the early 1980s. And so it's a matter of having a conversation. It's a matter of teaching and training and making content available and helping individuals understand that you may not have all of the bells and whistles, but what is available to churches today is far greater than anything that has been in the past, and you can do a credible job of conveying the gospel in an efficient, effective kind of way. Because the truth of the matter is, remember the old public access platform? The truth of the matter is, we say that God is best and that we should be striving for excellence. But some content and some productions end up being an embarrassment to the body of Christ.
Now, Bishop Lewter, I told these people to share this with grandma and them.
I'm sorry.
You just started speaking hieroglyphics, mathematics, fiction. I mean, you started speaking a whole lot of stuff that's going to take people to a different place. I want to simplify what you said. Watch this. You cannot upgrade your home television during Black Friday to a 6K TV, but watch a 720p signal. It won't be clear.
That's right.
But you cannot upgrade your church to a 6K church and do 720p ministry. It won't be clear. So even though, we have a strong affinity for production, even though now you don't even have to have a building as a pastor, you can just start preaching on Facebook that some of y'all have. Now you got Facebook and Instagram apostles. They ain't being laid hands on. They ain't been mentored by nobody, but they got a platform because people have clicked like and share, right?
Right.
The point is, how do we make sure that as the church that God intended to be global, that's what Bishop Golphin said, how does the church that God intended to be global level up in levels of ministry? Because as we saw in the pandemic, it wasn't what kind of camera you had that made you relevant. It was, do the people still know you're a church, even though the building is locked? Can the people, have the people been inspired by the gospel message of Jesus Christ, even though they're not in the pews? Can you preach without the organ on A flat? Have you figured out that hermeneutics in virtual space is not the same? Ain't nobody sitting through your 60-minute sermon. You can't always get the 3 points and the close. You might need to do one good point and lock it down to next week. You need to learn how to preach in series so that people will keep coming back. I mean, but it's not just a matter anymore about saying, I want to be a pastor, I want to have a church. Because what technology and innovation has done is taking down a lot of barriers of entry to every industry. I mean, now you don't even have to buy Photoshop anymore. You can get Canva for free, you know? And so it's the same thing with ministry, but in terms of authenticity, we are still responsible for what we produce on behalf of Jesus. Now, Bishop Golphin, you got to help us do this legitimately, because I know that there are some brothers and sisters who before the pandemic was itching to be released out into their own ministry. And then for 18 months, they were just out there doing whatever. And when we come back, you know, they're going to call themselves pastors, apostles, bishops, priests, and all that other kind of stuff. But how do we develop ourselves to be effective in ministry, but take care of our business at the same time?
See, there's 2 points here, Pastor. I think, and Dr. Lewter agree with me here. There are 2 points. One is we talk about this legal structure that needs to be done. Let me hit the business side first. With anything, even the church, we have to work under the laws and the rules of our states and our country. We have to legitimately set ourselves up. You know, Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God." So let's make ourselves legitimately under the rules and regulations we have inside of our states, inside of our government. All right, we're legal entity. I think the other piece to this is a reorientation and a retraining of people. One of the things that the early church was good at was catechism. They trained constantly. And in other words, I think I'm really convinced that the whole church, the examples you made of what people cannot do now in terms of their homiletical style, their hermeneutical style, there needs to be a discipleship program to retrain a new era of ministries that just have to get out of old platforms and move into new platforms. I think it needs to be some training, school of apostles, schools of prophets, schools of pastors. You need to understand how to now preach to a new audience, because now there's a new dimension coming on. There's a new paradigm. So you can't use the same old strategy and tactics. And again, what are we doing? What is the real burden? What's your real calling? Is it just to be a performer or entertainer, or is it to present a message? And that message has impact because you have oil that is on your life that is taking people on a level. When I teach on leadership, I point out to people, real leadership is about who's following you. And so if you got nobody following you, maybe you're just taking a walk. So one of the things that's important is if you're going to create a following, you still need to be trained how to manage that following.
So one of the things you mentioned is we must retrain the church.
Yep.
Now, we done been to church for a long time. We got our ordination certificates. The church mother's been trained for a long time. Some of them still wearing their doilies. What I did see during the pandemic was no Benson and Hall, no Murphy robes, no Josephus. Ain't nobody preaching in that from their living rooms, right? But for some of us, we have always done it this way. In this season, post-pandemic, the "we have always done it this way" church will not survive. How is it that we can inspire the 2 words that the church struggles with the most, change and transition, in the way that does not lose those who have been ingrained in what we've been doing for so long? You know, in certain experiences, you still have to add what it is that people think church should be in order for them to feel like they've had a worship experience. How have you all designed this course to help people shift, to help people pivot, to help people be able to weather the storms of this pandemic, this post-pandemic environment?
Pastor, let me thank you for the question, and it is so real and so relevant. And I would not mislead your audience and say that we have it all figured out. Here is the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is we're still in the midst of figuring it out. And we are crafting a new approach to doing ministry. Because one of the things that we cannot deny is that what we have done in the past is not going to work in the future. And the truth of the matter is, Pastor, we sometimes take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. Let me see if I can be a little more specific. Number one, in this post-pandemic church, and you said it just a few moments ago, nobody's going to sit up and listen to a 75-minute sermon. The attention span on this box that we're looking at is extremely limited. Most researchers will tell you that the average attention span on this platform and medium is about 6 to 8 minutes max. Here's something else. The camera that we're using, I'm using a Logitech 920. It is very intimate. It is up close. It brings me into your face. And so now there's some things that I cannot do when I have the distance and the placement of pulpit and pew and congregation. There's some things that I can't do in the intimacy of this box that I can do in a traditional church setting. It will come across either intimidating or come across as buffoonery. Why? Because this camera is going to accelerate, and it's going to emphasize the least little thing that I do. So I can't preach. You can't do that in this context. It simply won't work. But here's the problem. The problem is we have been conditioned to believe that preaching ain't preaching unless we're yelling and screaming, and that ministry is not ministry without certain antiphonal and call and response exercises, and we fall back. You know, I work very, very hard to do a clear message, concise, 12 to 14 minutes, which is what I feel is an appropriate time frame to really hold on to a person's attention span. But then I sometimes fall victim and feel like either I ain't preached unless I grab my ear and holler, or they don't feel God unless I increase the volume of my voice, try and find a little tune, do some version of a hoop. It is difficult. And the reality is we have not figured it all out. And even prior to the pandemic, everybody couldn't hoop. Now, and I'm sure you've all seen examples of folk who have tried that technique and have failed in that trying. Well, that is that same dilemma on steroids when it comes to the webcam and doing this in this kind of environment. Would you agree, Dr. Golphin?
Absolutely, Bishop. And I think that when you mention all of these various methods, Pastor Stevenson mentioned 2 things: change and transition. And that's where we are. We're in the midst of change and transition. And it's hard because people don't want to change. And it's hard to do transition because people don't know where we're going. We haven't figured it all out, but we're trying to. But I do know that in this day and time, because of the modem that we in and this whole thing, teaching has become more important than preaching. And so we've got to instruct, we've got to teach people. Bible class is becoming a little more important. People are taking notes, they're listening, they try and find the ways. Most people that know my teaching, I use PowerPoint almost exclusively when I'm trying to teach to help engage the audience. So I can keep their attention span going. So I create active PowerPoint slides so they can go forth. When Bishop Lewter and I are doing the courses, you'll see on this virtual church courses, we're both teaching, but we're using slides to keep your attention going back and forth as we talk and share the teaching platform together. There's just got to be new ways of saying the same old story. Pastor Stevenson?
Well, there's got to be new ways of saying the same old story. But some people have been preaching the same old sermon for a long time. And if, we often talk about being in the world, but not of the world. but the concept of being in the world is often applied to secular things. We talk about, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. What I'm gonna tell you right now is, if your church has not discovered metaverse, you're already behind. If your church is not already looking to shift towards what's happening next in social media, what's happening next in online giving platforms, you are already behind. How can this how to plant a virtual church course prepare people for the intricacies of ministry? I remember what it was like having seen people do communion and then get to my church on that first Sunday and realize that I got to serve it myself. And watching people do it does not prepare you to put your hands on it yourself. We've been watching people do produced church, pre-recorded church, and all these things, but there's still a large number of the church in general who are not engaging, who are not innovating, who are still stuck on the rock, trying to hold on to the flag of what used to be. Is the church in trouble? We said that the pre-pandemic church, Bishop Lewter, you said that the pre-pandemic church was in trouble.
That's right.
Are we still in trouble?
Yes, sir.
Did the ark show up outside and we still not getting it? How does your course? Because I think it's amazing. How does your course shake up people's etch-a-sketch and prepare them for what's next?
Well, it attempts to give them a rationale and an explanation on why they even need to consider this. And you're absolutely right. Some people are engaged in a habit. And the first thing that has to happen, as Dr. Golphin has already alluded to, there has to be a strong element of teaching within the body of Christ. And we try and do it on multiple levels. We provide a historical perspective. We provide a perspective as it relates to technology. We provide a perspective as it relates to the legality of what it is that they're doing. Unfortunately, everyone is not going to survive this transition, and everyone is not going to change. But just as in our neighborhoods, we have seen stores and businesses simply go out of business because of their inability to change and to shift, we're going to see the same thing. Every church is not going to survive. And I know this might sound a bit brutal, but every church is not going to survive. And those who are open to change, those who welcome new ideas, those are the ones who are going to be able to do these two things that we're talking about. And that is transition and change. Let me see if I can be a little more specific and salute you, Pastor Stevenson, in an area that I think is a prime example of what we're talking about. This Bitmoji church that you have introduced. I saw your video the other day and I was just astounded by it. I was so astounded until I called our administrative team together and said, look, we've got to figure out how to incorporate this into what we're doing. Now, my initial thought was this might be just a little bit advanced and just a little bit progressive for my adult church. But I did call the superintendent of my Sunday school together and I said, look, I think this is a perfect platform for our youth church or our junior church. And what was interesting is that I had some teachers who were a part of our ministry who said, well, Bishop, they have been doing the Bitmoji classroom for some time now. So it is something that's already in place. It's just a matter of adapting it for our own use. But if we fail to do so, and I can't put enough emphasis upon this, if we fail to do so, your church is not going to survive. If you're not able to transition, you're not able to change, you simply won't survive.
So I've seen the scripture refers to your gift shall make room for you in a completely different context during the transition.
Sure.
I had never really promoted myself personally just because of my own individual convictions. I believe we all fight ego at some point or another. All right. But during the pandemic, God used the gifts, talents, and skills that I possess from my professional environment and industry to operate in ministry and take ministry to a different level. All right. Bishop Golphin, you are an accountant to the stars of ministry. So, the pandemic allowed you to help ministries and church leaders shift all over the globe.
Yes.
Bishop Lewter, your innovation in a church history and pulling together the weekly clergy roundtable and having those kinds of conversations and reaching out to help people start church plants virtually. I mean, we are using what God gave us uniquely, right, and authentically as our own individual selves, outside of fellowships, outside of denominations, just being intricately who God made us to be, to advance the church. But the church has always had these skills. The church has always had these gifts. The church has not always been as embracing of creatives as it could. That's why the dancers only come to your church on the Sunday when they dance, because you're not trying to relate to them in any other way. That's why the spoken word people are only used on Christmas and Easter to write the play, because you're not trying to find a way to engage them into ministry. How does the virtual church possibility expand to make room for creatives?
Well, let me say this, as you mentioned that. See, I think our particular approach that we did with the virtual church was to look at people who are actually starting out. So we're looking at pioneers and innovative people who need to get started in ministry. They've got a calling, and we give them a platform. Some of the churches were already established, already had a website, and already think they're doing a virtual church simply because they have a website. That's not really the concept of the virtual church. It's an extension of your particular local church. The other thing that's involved is that, as you mentioned, only those certain Sundays that those particular ministries are working. I believe that what the church is going to have to do is take these boundaries off. We have boundaries of churches being restricted locally, geographically, pulling ministries into certain boundaries. And if we're going to talk about the global church, we're going to have to release people. There are people who relate to your ministry in different parts of the country and different parts of the world that has nothing to do with where you're located centrally. But I've got people contacting me literally around the world almost daily, asking to be a part of my ministry, being a part of this, being a both. I cannot be restrictive over the fact that I might be in North Carolina and can't deal with somebody in California or can't deal with somebody in Texas because I'm not living there. So I think that when we start getting the boundaries off of ministry, I was at a church a few years ago who on the fifth Sunday, his church was crowded on the fifth Sunday. And on the other Sundays, they were hardly any people in the church. And I said to him, I said, have you ever thought of maybe trying to do on the fifth Sunday, every Sunday, so that people will come? It's got to be some reason that everybody packs out the fifth Sunday, but don't come the other Sundays. Maybe you need to change your approach. And I think that's what is happening. We're not looking at what we're doing. We just keep trying to do the same thing, and we box people up into a ministry that keeps them in a cage. And now with the way global church is going and social media, people are breaking out of that cage.
And I think that is the power of discourse, because it takes voices of church fathers like you all. It takes patriarchs to come to the table to say, hey, we need to do this differently, because the younger voices who will be saying the same thing and have been saying the same thing for a long time are referred to as renegades, mavericks. They just want to be too different. This old hip hop church, they don't even call it hip hop no more. So, it takes voices like yours who are seasoned, who have seen the church go through transition in times past, and like you said earlier, can remind us that this ain't the first time we've been through this pandemic type experience. Right. This isn't the first time that the church has been pushed to innovate. This isn't the first time that we've seen this. But how do we learn how to transition like we have in the past so we can move forward? This is what I need right now. All right, just because I know that if y'all answer this question right here, everybody's gonna sign up for this course. 3 tips. Each one of you give me 3 tips that will help us move forward into this virtual church planning environment. 3 tips.
Tip Tip number one, use the time that is most convenient, comfortable, and available to you. No longer do you have to restrict yourself to Sunday morning from 11 to 1 o'clock in terms of your own availability. Because here's the truth of the matter. Truth of the matter is we don't feel the same way 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's some days that we feel better. We have mood swings. Find the time that's comfortable for you. Number two, use equipment that's already available. Don't run out, spend $5,000, $10,000, and you haven't mastered how to use your Apple phone or your Android phone. Use the resources that you currently have available. And then here's my third tip. My third tip is involve your people. Sometimes our egocentricity and our narcissism causes us to believe that people really want to look at us for 45 minutes from one perspective and one angle, and they want to get everything that we have to say. I have found that the ministries that seemingly really work are those that involve the various people in that ministry. So I have my deacons involved, I have my ministers involved, I have my elders involved. I do a ministry moment, I do a teaching moment, and I try and create a platform that includes as many people as possible. Yes, I am perhaps central to the broadcast because I do the message, but I limit the time of that, and I make sure I include people. Why? Because church is still community. It's not a solo act. It's not a solo performance. And so you're not doing virtual church if the only thing and the only people that they see is you. If it's going to be community, that means you have to involve people to convey and to project the message and the image of community.
You are not doing virtual church if the only person the people see is you. Did you hear that? I'm going to say it again for the people in the back. You are not doing virtual church if the only person the people see is you. My God. Dr. Golphin, what you got for us, sir? Give us 3 tips.
I think tip number one for me that people ought to look at is the way to take your foundation. You need to get your foundation straight. So getting structurally, legally is primarily important so that you can, number one, be legitimate. Be legitimate. That's tip number one that I want to give. Tip number two, rethink how you do ministry. Rethink it. Realize that if you're talking to an audience, that you got to figure out what audience you want to reach, and then what message you want to deliver. You have to rethink your message. Are you into local ministry, community ministry, or global ministry? And there's a choice because that will depend on how you get involved. So of course, be legal, get yourself legalized, find out your platform, get those things together, and lastly, be able to manage your resources responsibly, especially your money. Make sure your money management is together so that you have arm's length transactions away from your personal funds to your ministry funds.
Whew, man, I know that by now, everybody is ready to register for this course. Listen, up on the screen, you're going to see a screen that shows you when this next course is coming available. I need you to sign up right now, because the information that is being made available for us is going to change the landscape of how we do ministry. You can't continue to operate the same way you did. If God brought us through all these months of pandemic, you don't think he wants you to do something a little bit different? Oh my goodness. Thank you all so much for your time and your participation today. The education we've received just in this small amount of time is going to push us to hit the registration button. I cannot wait to see how the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ is empowered to go further in this next season just because of what you all have shared today. Any last parting words? And please tell the people how they can get in contact with you all personally as well.
Amen.
Bishop? Well, I am available at bishopacl@gmail, bishopacl@gmail, and I would give you additional information, but my Archbishop Golphin has scolded me for giving out my telephone number, so I'm not going to do that. But bishopacl@gmail.com is how you can reach me. Yes.
And also we'll give mine, Dr. DMG, spell out Dr. DOCTOR, DMG at gmail.com. That's how they get in touch with us. And bothly, we do two schools. One is the Graduate School of Episcopal Studies, where we have got a lot of things on. You heard Bishop Lewter talk a little bit about church history and the things we develop in terms of Episcopal courses there. We also have theology.learnworlds.com, where we're doing theological courses on there. We've got courses on there about church history and denominations, and this course on virtual church is on that platform. So get in touch with us. We're going to be setting up. Pastor Stevenson has made this available to you. We're going to be running this webinar. It's almost a 2-hour webinar. We'll probably do it in part 1 and part 2 so that you can get this webinar and enjoy this experience.
Listen, thank you all for watching today. Thank you for sharing this with as many people as you know need to learn different ways to innovate church, and specifically how to develop a virtual church plan. This is Pastor RJ Stevenson. I've been here today with Dr. Myles Golphin and Dr. Andy C. Lewter. Thank you so much. Remember to register for this class because you don't want to miss what God is doing next. We'll see you all next time. Don't go nowhere. I got the theologians with me tonight. Thank y'all so much for watching. Listen, y'all, we got live here Archbishop Myles Golphin, and we got Bishop Andy C. Lewter. Thank you all so much for sticking around to answer questions live. I'm excited about what's going on tonight.
Thank you so much for having us. It's certainly our joy and delight to be with you tonight. Looking forward to this exchange and this Q&A session.
So listen,
yes.
Go ahead, Bishop. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, yes, I've enjoyed the exchange too. Thank you for having us too.
Yes, sir. Listen, all of you who are watching online, this is the moment and opportunity for you to take your comments or your questions and put them down in the comments, and we'll bring them up on the screen and we'll answer your questions live right now. Listen, the virtual church webinar is scheduled for Saturday, December 18th at 10 o'clock a.m. I think we've put the link to the class up on the screen. You can look down in the comments on whatever platform you're watching and see the comments down below. You can go to that link and register for the class right now. We're excited about you joining and engaging in this wonderful conversation. But I wanted Archbishop Golphin, and Bishop Lewter to be available tonight just in case anybody had any questions. And let me tell you, people have been commenting and chiming in the entire time. They've been active the entire time. Overseer Helen Singster, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Angela Marks, thank you for joining us tonight. Terry Champion, thank you. William Vaughn, thank you. Who else is up here? Let me see. I know I saw a couple of other names. Valeria Chambers, thank you. Bishop J. Donald Edwards, thank you. Bishop Charles Johnson Page, thank you so much. Archbishop Melvin Rivers, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Listen, this has been an amazing conversation, and I wanted to make an opportunity for you all to give any questions that you all have for Bishop Golphin and Bishop Lewter tonight. My brother, Archbishop Corey Alexander Jenkins, thank you so much. I know Bishop Golphin is excited about seeing your name here. If you all have any questions, put your questions down in the comment section or in the chat, and we'll answer those questions as we go through this. Bishop Golphin, about how engaging is it going to be, or how important is it for a person who is engaging in virtual church to sign up to watch the webinar?
Well, it's very easy. If they go to that link, that's a Zoom link, they'll be able to go and pay the registration fee, which of course, it's registration fee, it's not free, it is $75. But you can get almost 2 hours of interactive training through PowerPoint. Bishop Lewter and I are critiquing the class, and you'll be able to get a lot more information than what we did tonight. We go through a panel discussion to show you how to set up. And then, of course, we leave you some things at the end. And this is also being created as a course, too.
So, Bishop Lewter, I know you all have been using Teachable and a whole bunch of other platforms of technology for a long time. I know that you're personally engaged in helping other churches to plant virtually. How is it that this platform is going to be used to give people information that they need to be successful in virtually planting?
Well, what I wanted to emphasize and draw attention to is that we have really focused upon providing real life examples, stepping away from the theory, but to provide real life examples, either in the area of the kind of equipment that you need, the kind of approach that you want to take, your setup, the orientation of your cameras. Digital equipment has advanced and has moved so fast in such a short period of time. Until if I was giving this webinar just 3 years ago, 5 years ago, what I would be proposing and what I would be offering would be altogether different. And in like fashion, Archbishop Golphin, Dr. Golphin, has real life applications, real life exercises that you need to be involved in to keep what you're doing legal and authentic. And so I think that your audience is going to find that this is a real life exercise and you're going to come away from this experience not simply having been informed, but having placed in your hands the very tools that you need to be effective and successful.
Now we got our first question for the night coming from Archbishop Corey Alexander Jenkins, and I hope y'all ready for this. He says, how do we best address the Lord's Supper in a virtual setting? How do we best address the Lord's Supper in a virtual setting?
Archbishop, you want to go first?
No, I want to let you go first. That's your,
okay.
That's your
Sure. This is something that I have both wrestled with consistently over the course of the pandemic. We started, first of all, we don't use the common cup practice. It's been a long time since we've been able to convince our people to share in the usage of a common cup. And you know, the pandemic has probably aggravated that to a great extent. So we, on the first Sundays, we in advance advise and alert our people to go get a drinking item, to go get a morsel of bread, whether that's a cracker, a piece of bread, water, juice, iced tea, but some drinking item along with some morsel of bread. And then I lead them in the Eucharist remotely. And I invite them to participate, but they would have secured the elements of the Eucharist in advance on their own. That's what we have done. Now, over the course of the pandemic, on the first Sundays, we had what we call the drive-by Lord's Supper, where following our virtual service, I actually would station myself on the back steps of the church with the traditional trays that would be held by the diaconate, and our members were invited and encouraged to come by the church, not get out of their cars, not come into the sanctuary, but simply to drive through. And as they drove through the parking lot, I would be on the back steps, and as they drove by, I would administer the Lord's Supper and serve them in a sealed container, both bread and fruit of the vine. That worked very, very well. It also gave me an opportunity to eyeball the members of our congregation so that I could see them and they could see me during that period of time. Both of those strategies seem to work very, very well.
Bishop Golphin, do you have any suggestions for serving the Lord's Supper in virtual setting?
No, basically what Bishop Lewter said, I've had many clients that have done the same thing. They either have given the element out ahead of time. Sometimes they've come by the church and gotten the little cups with the bread inside of the thing, and at the service. I've done communion services online, and they do it themselves, and then we share it, and everybody shares it together in a gallery view or some sort of view where you can see people, and they actually do it. Or I know of some churches that have done what Bishop Lewis suggested. They've had the drive-by situation where they've done that and got their communion that way. The other way, too, also is teams of people going into homes and doing the community service, especially with older saints. So I know of many people have taken the iPads into the home, have a service there, watch it on the iPad from the senior citizen's home, and then serve them communion there. So that's also another novel way.
So when I serve communion, I do it as a BYOE event. You got to bring your own elements. So you gather whatever you have at home
Mhm.
We pray a consecration, and then we observe the Lord's Supper that way. Um, as it regards to the Lord's Supper, many of the sacraments of the church that we see as sacred are done physically, like baptism. Have you all had anyone to ask or consider how to do baptism virtually?
That's very, very interesting that you raise that point, because the truth of the matter is we've not had one candidate for baptism throughout the entire pandemic. We've actually had a limited number of persons who have come to join the church during the course of the pandemic. I think we've had about 10 over the course of the 15 months of the pandemic when we were out of our sanctuary. We had no one make themselves available for the for the for the ordinance of the baptism. However, on the first Sunday in January, we do have one of our young members who's been a part of the church for quite some time. She's reached the age of accountability and maturity. She's expressed a desire to be baptized, and we're going to do that. However, we're going to do that with her in the pool, and the person's doing the baptizing outside the pool. That's something that I've done for many, many years now. I've not been in the pool with the candidates. Actually, the members of the diaconate have done that, but we're going to do this where both the members of the diaconate and myself are outside the pool, and only the candidate is in the pool, and we're doing that to safeguard some measures. Now, I can't circumvent and avoid this little theological jab here, because I am an advocate and a proponent of transubstantiation, of consubstantiation, as opposed to transubstantiation. And because I believe and I endorse and am an advocate of consubstantiation, it was no problem for us to, as you have said, Pastor Stevenson, to BYOE, bring your own elements. Why? Because for us, the bread is symbolic of his body. Come on here, somebody. And the drinking item is symbolic. It is a metaphor of his blood. If I was subscribing to transubstantiation, as does the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Pastor Stevenson, then that would have been a little more challenging and a little more difficult, because of the belief that once prayed over, that both the bread and the blood and the wine becomes the actual literal body of Jesus Christ and the literal blood of Jesus Christ. So it seemed to me that believing in consubstantiation as a theological position and posture was a little more accommodating, especially during the pandemic, than if we had been transubstantial in our belief in our theology. I just thought I would say that to the conversation.
just to bring complications up, that's all.
Are there any more questions? I would love to take any more questions. It is not common for us to have Bishop Golphin and Bishop Lewter up here this time of the night after when I had this interview. Are there any more questions in the comments? I would love to make them available for you. Listen, please, please, please go and register right now for the session. It's going to happen on Saturday, December the 18th at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I promise you, your church, your ministry will be forever better because you have decided to go and watch this how to plant a virtual church. The link to the Zoom is in the chat. Listen, it is a worthwhile investment for you and your ministry to go and observe and consider what things are necessary for a virtual church. Listen, the churches who will do well are not just virtual, but hybrid. I talked to someone today who mentioned that their church had an online pastor, meaning they have a pastor. The pastor is there for those who are in the physical church, but then they have another person who is committed to pastoring those persons who are participating in an online environment. Listen, this webinar, How to Plant a Virtual Church, is going to be necessary for ministry moving forward, because as all these variants continue to come, imagine that God may have given us a break and given us an opportunity to get it back together, and this pandemic season spikes up again. What are you going to do? Are you going to wait and react like we did the last time? Or are you at least going to be prepared? You want to know how to have emergency preparedness for your ministry? You better go to this webinar, How to Plant a Virtual Church. Any last words from you all? Thank you all so much again for your time tonight.
Well, I just want to thank you, Pastor Stevenson, for having this session with us, and thank all of you who have been willing to join us. It's been a great time. The interview was great, and the Q&A sessions are there, and we hope you sign up for our webinar. We hope to see you on the 18th at 10 a.m. Link is down the bottom. You can hit that link to go to the registration information, and Bishop Lewter and I will be co-teaching the class together, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you on that day.
And let me thank you, Pastor Stevenson. You are such a tremendous asset and gift to the body of Christ, and what you've done tonight and how you've helped us, even in other areas, has simply been tremendous. And we're so grateful, so thankful for all that you do, and how the Lord is using you as an instrument of the 21st century to help us rethink the way that we're going to do ministry in the future.
Listen, everybody, I hope you came tonight writing down your notes and getting all that you need. I hope you sign up with the links below on how you can register for the class, how to plant a virtual church. And until next time, this is RJ Stevenson. Love you all. Have a wonderful night. God bless.